In we begin. I think we're just doing something chill today. I was real excited yesterday from just messing around with this this convo where we kind of, it includes a lot of what I said in comments, which we actually should check out. Do we have any more comments that we should respond to? I think this was actually earlier today that I haven't seen this. Plants and trees do not have brains or even nervous systems, but they have a lot of behaviors and functions we associate with consciousness, like communication, decision-making, and adaptive behavior, memory, learning, susceptibility to anesthesia, deep cycles, etc. Okay, very well. All right. So I was thinking of just kind of reading through this again, and then we got some videos to watch that we could fill up the rest of the time with. It was exciting to see ChatGPT say stuff that seems to make it seem like it understands where this is going in terms of our framework. So we did a simple one yesterday, which I'm gonna need a gank at some point. I want to have like a cheat sheet, or like a very succinct, like for anyone that asks about what this means for consciousness or what this means for science or whatever, we need a quick version. I don't think it can be the document's main takeaways, even though the main takeaways are succinct. Like they're not the scope of part one, even the main takeaways, is still a little bit farther than we were trying to go in terms of some like cheat sheet, quick, this is how we understand the world, meaning, understanding, etc. And then the document starts going into how we could leverage this. So what we can do to make sense of our understanding, etc. So, all right, let's see. What do we got here? And then I asked for, can you do a more technical version optimized for pedagogical use and in paragraph form rather than bullet point form? Below is a technical, pedagogically optimized, continuous paragraph version of the framework. It is precise, carefully worded, and avoids any unintended modal force. It offers a logically structured exposition appropriate for advanced students, researchers, and philosophically trained readers while maintaining clear and non-dogmatic. A technical, pedagogically oriented exposition of the framework. Human understanding can be coherently interpreted as emerging from the interaction between biological embodiment, affective valuation, cultural learning, and the interpretive capacities built into language and social practices. So this is just... the one thing I don't like about this already off the bat is that it's choosing like the main players, but it's not like the wording here is to as emerging from, makes it seem like these are the players and this is how it works, whereas these are ways in which we can make sense of how it works. So on this view, the fundamental materials of cognition, sensations, emotions, habits, expectations, and conceptual patterns are not discrete internal objects, but dynamically maintained states of an organism regulating itself in a world. Experience on this interpretation is always affectively structured and anticipatory. The mind continually generates predictions about what will occur, evaluates discrepancies between expectations and occurrence, and adjust both its anticipatory patterns and its felt orientation accordingly. These adjustments are shaped not only by biological constraints, but by the cultural environment that trains individuals into shared repertoires of inference, emotional reaction, and communicative practice. Even though these repertoires differ across individuals and communities, they overlap extensively due to shared neural architecture, common developmental pressures, and widely reproduced social norms. This shared structure explains how understanding, coordination, discourse, and joint inquiry are possible despite the contingency of any single person's belief system. All right, that's nice. Conviction, our felt sense of truth, is not enacted merely through explicit reasoning, but through affectively modulated patterns of prediction and habituated responsiveness. What a person believes at any moment is therefore not exhausted by what they could articulate reflectively. It is constituted, at least in part, by deeper dispositional tendencies that often operate automatically. Nevertheless, reflective art, so we should say that like what someone believes or what someone's understanding is somewhat ambiguous. And therefore we can consider how it wouldn't just include what you think you understand in the moment or what you could say in a moment, but what you're implicitly assuming as you act out in the world. Like what, you know, I didn't think about this chair when I walked over and I sat down on it, but I must have understood that I could sit down on this chair in order for me to sit down on the chair. So, all right, nevertheless, reflective articulation plays a crucial role in reorganizing these tendencies. Reflective beliefs can gradually reshape habits as one internalizes conceptual frameworks over time, and habituated patterns can, conversely, constrain what feels plausible at the reflective level, right? This interplay shows why understanding cannot be reduced either to propositional content or to unconscious processes alone. Instead, it is a layered interaction between implicit expectations, affective signals, and explicit conceptualization. It is within this layered interplay that the idea of belief functions meaningfully without requiring a single universal definition. Within the framework, the scientific method can be understood not as a universal epistemic law, but as a disciplined practice that becomes compelling for agents who aim to integrate their intuitions with our best collective empirical knowledge. The method is valuable because it provides socially established norms for testing, revising, and stabilizing conceptual models in ways that reduce idiosyncratic distortion. It offers a communal procedure for detecting where our anticipations fail to align with the constraints of the world as we encounter it. This is not to say that all people prioritize the scientific method, either consciously or unconsciously, nor that such prioritization is logically required. Rather, the method gains its normative force only within a broader aspiration towards coherence between experience, empirical findings, and the explanatory framework we use to navigate life. Frameworks we use to navigate life. Its authority is conditional and contextual. A person who wishes to reconcile their understanding with contemporary science may permissibly adopt the method as a guiding norm, while others who prioritize different aims may legitimately orient themselves differently. Conflicts between scientific findings and intuitive experience do not require a forced choice. Instead, they invite conceptual clarification by examining how our language functions, how our intuitions arise, and how scientific models operate. We can reinterpret both sides in ways that reduce apparent contradiction. Often, scientific findings challenge inherited conceptual categories rather than lived experience itself. In such cases, the task is to refine those categories so that intuitive and empirical dimensions of understanding can coexist coherently. This refinement is not primarily a matter of discovering metaphysical essences, but of reconstructing our conceptual schemes so that it better fits our experiential life and our best empirical models. Over time, such reconstructions may become internalized, influencing both conscious judgments and automatic dispositions. But this internalization is aspirational rather than necessary. It depends on the individual's aims and habits rather than on any universal epistemic demand. From this vantage point, the external world can be discussed without committing to metaphysical doctrines that claim privileged access to reality as it is. The world constrains our understanding through the systematic patterns we learn to anticipate and the resistance we encounter when our anticipations fail. Yet what we experience is always mediated by conceptual and affective processes. Scientific models on this view are not literal pictures of the world, but highly successful predictive frameworks constructed over long periods of cultural evolution. So far, this paragraph has been a banger. They offer one rigorous way of organizing our interaction with the world. They do not exhaust the possible ways of conceptualizing it, nor do they invalidate the phenomenological or existential dimensions of human life. Different interpretive layers, neural, phenomenological, cultural, ethical, illuminate different aspects of the same complex situation and need not be collapsed into one privileged perspective. Norms, including moral norms, can be understood as emerging from the interaction of shared human dispositions, social environmental pressures, and historical cultural learning. What did I just say? Norms, including moral norms, can be understood as emerging from the interaction of shared human dispositions, social environmental pressures, and historical cultural learning. On this interpretation, norms are neither arbitrary nor metaphysically absolute. They exert real force because they are internalized affectively and reinforced socially. Individuals can evaluate norms based on the aims they endorse, such as reducing harm, promoting flourishing, or achieving coherence, so that we would say moral norms here specifically. But these evaluations always arise from within some perspectival stance. This does not entail that all norms are equivalent. It simply means that evaluation is situated and that persuasion and critique operate by appealing to shared dispositions, shared concerns, and shared expectations rather than to a view from nowhere. The overall framework, therefore, presents a way of understanding human cognition, meaning an inquiry that is scientifically informed but not reductive, phenomenologically sensitive without being purely subjective, normatively aware without asserting universal mandates, and capable of integrating intuition, science, culture, and lived experience into a coherent and dynamic picture. It is not offered as the correct metaphysics, but as a permissible and intellectually responsible approach for those, man, this is crazy language. An intellectually responsible approach for those who seek to synthesize our best empirical knowledge and with a nuanced understanding of human experience. It aims to clarify how beliefs form, how norms matter, how understanding develops, and how conceptual frameworks can be refined to help individuals and communities navigate complex, changing realities. If this approach resonates with a reader's aims, it can serve as a powerful tool for self-understanding and inquiry. If not, it leaves all other frameworks untouched, since it claims no universal authority. Wow. Look at that. If you want, I can also prepare blah, 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 blah. And I say, now, can you do a version that is simply descriptive and comprehensive? That would allow me to copy it and paste it into another LLM, and that LLM would essentially have the same level of nuance without about the intricacies of our discussion and the framework. All right. Any questions? All right, then let's continue. Below is a fully descriptive, comprehensive, label minimal, non-prescriptive, non-argumentative, neural exposition of the entire framework you've developed throughout this conversation. It is written so that any LLM given only this text could reconstruct the whole conceptual architecture, including the modal nuances, the distinction between reflective and embodied belief, the conditioned role of scientific method, the role of affect, prediction, and culture, the non-dogmatic permissive nature of the metaphysics, the treatment of normativity, the layered nature of explanation, the interplay of intuition, science, and conceptual revision. It is long because it needs to encode the nuance without relying on our prior conversation. You may copy-paste it into another model. It is self-contained. Okay. Full description, reconstruction of the framework. The framework described here is a way of understanding human experience, belief, meaning, knowledge, normativity, and the world that aims to integrate contemporary scientific findings, phenomenological insight, cultural understanding, and everyday intuitions into a single coherent picture. It does not claim universal authority and does not assert that its interpretations reflect metaphysical necessities. Instead, it presents itself as a permissible, coherent, and useful way to understand how human understanding works, why beliefs feel the way they do, how norms arise and function, and how scientific knowledge interacts with lived experience. The starting point is that all human understanding arises within lived experience. Experience itself is not neutral. It is shaped by affective, emotional responses. bodily states, learned habits, cultural patterns, and the anticipatory nature of cognition. Contemporary neuroscience and predictive processing theories provide a way to describe this anticipatory character. The mind continuously generates predictions about what will occur and updates these predictions when they are violated. This constant cycle of expectation adjustment is inseparable from affect. Prediction confirmation feels stabilizing, and prediction error feels disruptive. On this understanding, belief is not merely a matter of explicit reflection. It is grounded in these deeper patterns of embodied, affectively modulated prediction and response. Conviction, the feeling that something is true, arises from these affective predictive processes rather than from explicit rational deliberation alone. People's reflective beliefs often track what they have already internalized through long-standing patterns of learning, emotional reinforcement, cultural norms, and habitual action. Because individuals share similar neural and bodily architecture, because individuals share similar neural and bodily architecture, live in structured social environments, and are trained into similar inferential and communicative practices, their understandings converge in many important ways. This convergence explains how social coordination, conversation, institutions, and shared knowledge are possible, even though every person's understanding is technically shaped by personal experience. In this framework, beliefs can be understood in a dual way. First, it is possible to interpret a belief as a set of embodied dispositions, affectively weighted expectations, and habitual patterns of response. Second, it is possible to interpret a belief as what a person can articulate reflectively. The framework does not claim that either interpretation is universally correct. Instead, it claims that both are legitimate and compatible within an understanding. Well, so the second one here is actually embedded in the first one, really, because our response to something, like even the prompt of what is my belief, or when we're saying anything or trying to think anything, like these are all really just habitual patterns of thought or habitual patterns of vocalization. Claims that both are legitimate and compatible within an understanding of cognition that integrates neuroscience, phenomenology, and cultural theory. It simply states that interpreting beliefs this way is allowed within this picture and offers explanatory clarity. Okay. Scientific method plays a distinctive but conditional role. The framework does not claim that scientific method is universally binding or that all humans must prioritize it. Instead, it treats scientific method as a disciplined social practice that is compelling if one seeks to integrate one's understanding with collectively gathered empirical knowledge. In this sense, scientific method has normative force only within a set of aims, such as coherence with evidence, reduction of personal bias, and the desire to build reliable, predictive models of the world. Scientific method is understood not as a metaphysical authority, but as a culturally developed method for iteratively refining conceptual frameworks. Those who do not share these aims may appropriately orient themselves differently, and the framework does not condemn or delegitimize such differences. Wow. The framework could have an argument. The argument implicit in the framework is that this is the most coherent way we could talk about these things. And if it's not, then when we find out what we can do to make it better, we have to do that. All right, conflicts between intuitive experience and scientific findings do not require choosing one over the other. Instead, they invite conceptual clarification. Intuitions and scientific findings operate at different levels. Intuitions arise from immediate embodied and affective responses, while scientific findings arise from methodological, communal, and abstract modeling. Apparent conflicts often arise because inherited conceptual categories are too coarse or outdated to accommodate both intuitive and scientific insights simultaneously. The framework therefore interprets conceptual refinement as a constructive process, examining language, adjusting categories, and reinterpreting intuitions within a broader explanatory model. This refinement is not an obligatory universal rule. It is a possible and coherent response for those who value integrating multiple dimensions of understanding. The framework treats the external world as something that people conceptualize through interpretive processes. It does not deny the existence of a world independent of any individual's experience, but it emphasizes that what people experience is always mediated by conceptual structures, affective responses, and predictive processes. Scientific models offer highly successful ways to conceptualize the world, not by depicting it as it really is, but by creating stable, reliable, and empirically constrained frameworks that allow us to anticipate and manipulate phenomena. These models are products of long historical and cultural development. They do not invalidate the phenomenological, ethical, or existential dimensions of experience. Those dimensions describe different aspects of the same complex situation. Norms, moral, epistemic, social, are understood as arising from a combination of shared human tendencies, cultural evolution, emotional conditioning, and social reinforcement. They are real in their effects, binding within communities, and experientially compelling. Oh, okay. This is ambiguous writing because I don't know if binding here is a verb or not, because are real, I don't know if the parallelism is starting with real as a noun or are real as a verb. Binding within communities and experientially compelling because they are internalized affectively. But they are not absolute in a metaphysical sense. Their authority is rooted in shared dispositions and social practices, not in an external realm of objective values. Nonetheless, because humans share many deep tendencies and concerns, such as avoiding harm, maintaining social cohesion, and seeking flourishing, norms converge significantly across communities. This convergence allows moral disagreements to be meaningful and critique to be possible, allows moral disagreements to be meaningful and critique to be possible without requiring universal or eternal standards. The framework acknowledges that people often do not act in accordance with their reflectively endorsed beliefs. Habit, emotion, and automatic processes frequently govern action. Thus, fully internalizing a conceptual framework is a matter not just of reflective endorsement, but of gradual habituation. Over time, repeated reflection, practice, and emotional reinforcement can align one's embodied dispositions with one's conceptual understanding. This alignment is not guaranteed and not presented as a universal ideal. It is simply one way in which conceptual frameworks may become practically effective for agents who adopt them. Finally, the framework positions itself as a constructive metaphysical option. It does not claim to reveal the essence of reality or to legislate belief. Instead, it offers a unified way of understanding mind, experience, normativity, science, and the world that coheres with contemporary empirical knowledge and preserves the integrity of lived experience. It is compatible with multiple layers of explanation, neural, phenomenological, cultural, ethical, and does not attempt to reduce these layers to a single privileged description. The framework invites a form of reflective clarity and practical orientation without requiring universal assent. It is meant to serve those who find it clarifying or helpful while leaving other frameworks intact. All right. And then I said, now can you do a paragraph form accessible, not overly technical version? All right, one more, and then we can start watching some videos. Preserves all of the nuance, but avoids technical language, heavy philosophical references, or specialized terminology. It is readable for anyone who, with general curiosity while still encoding the logic of your view. Okay. Human understanding can be described as something that grows out of our lived experience, shaped by our bodies, our emotions, our habits, and the cultural environments we develop within. We never encounter the world in a raw or neutral way. Instead, we constantly anticipate what is going to happen, feel when our expectations are confirmed or violated, and adjust ourselves accordingly. This ongoing mix of prediction, emotion, and learning shapes not only our impressions of the world, but also our sense of what feels true. Beliefs are not just things we reflectively endorse, they are also the deeper tendencies, reactions, and patterns of attention that guide us automatically, often without our awareness. Because all people share similar nervous systems, live in structured social environments, and are trained into common ways of speaking and thinking, our understandings overlap in many important ways. This makes communication and coordination possible, even though every individual's understanding is technically shaped by their own history. On this view, reflective reasoning and everyday intuition are not in conflict. Instead, they affect and reshape one another over time. We can adopt conceptual frameworks reflectively, and through repeated use, they can change our habits and emotional responses. Likewise, long-standing habits often shape what we spontaneously find plausible or implausible. This makes belief a layered phenomenon, partly felt, partly learned, partly reflective. When it comes to science, the framework treats the scientific method not as a universal obligation, but as a practice that becomes appealing if one wants to align personal understanding with the most reliable collective knowledge we have. Science does not override our lived experience. It offers stable tools for testing and refining our interpretations whenever we want that sort of alignment. People who do not share these aims can reasonably orient themselves differently, and nothing in the framework denies the legitimacy of such differences. It depends what we mean by legitimacy, but it wouldn't like the colloquial use of legitimacy, it wouldn't deny the legitimacy of other such differences. When scientific findings and intuitive experience appear to conflict, this view suggests that the conflict often arises from outdated or oversimplified concepts rather than from experience itself. Our task, if we choose it, is to refine our concepts so that both sides can coexist coherently. In this sense, we are not forced to choose between the scientific picture and the lived picture. We can revise the conceptual structure that frames the conflict in the first place. This approach also treats talk about the external world carefully. It does not deny that there is a world outside us, but it emphasizes that the only way we encounter it is through our own interpretive and affective processes. Scientific models are extremely powerful ways of organizing our interaction with the world, but they are still models, tools that help us navigate and predict, not windows onto some final or absolute reality. Norms, whether moral, epistemic, or social, are understood. We can understand norms as emerging from shared tendencies, cultural learning, emotional patterns, and long-term social reinforcement. They matter because they are deeply internalized and shape how we feel, act, and judge, but they are not absolute in any metaphysical sense. They shape how we feel, act, and judge, regardless of whether we want them to, right? That's the point. So we don't have like control over these theoretical norms. Their authority depends on the aims and concerns we share with others. Disagreement does not mean there is no basis for dialogue. It simply means that persuasion relies on appealing to shared sensibilities rather than invoking some objective standard outside of human life. Because our underlying tendencies overlap so widely, much of our moral and social life still converges in stable ways. This framework does not assume that people always act according to their reflective commitments. Much of human life is governed by automatic or habitual processes. If someone wants their actions to better align with a particular worldview or a set of values, they may need to repeatedly reflect on that framework until it becomes internalized at the level of habit. Over time, such internalization can make the framework feel more natural, though this process is optional rather than required. Overall, the framework presents itself not as a final theory of the world, but as a coherent way of making sense of how experience, science, culture, and intuition fit together. It allows for multiple layers of explanation, biological, experiential, cultural, ethical, without reducing any of them to the others. It is offered as a way to bring clarity and practical understanding to the complexities of human life for those who find such an approach helpful without insisting that others must adopt it. Okay. If you want an even shorter, summarize in 5 words. Mm. Experience, affect, culture, shape, understanding. Wow. Look at that. Incredible. All right, that's a lot of fun. All right, let's check out Thompson.
First of all, I'd like to begin by saying that the ideas that I'm going to present are
I should write
derived
notes.
from the many years that I collaborated with Francisco Varela. And I knew Francisco from the time I was 14 years old.
Is Francisco dead? Ah, yeah. Okay, so yeah, I mean, Thompson looks pretty young, so I should say relatively speaking, and yeah, I guess they probably started working on this stuff a long time ago. I remember like Thompson's got stuff from like 2001 and onward, and I guess even prior to that, if 2001 is this okay, interesting.
And he was a combination of a brother,
Can I
older
move this
brother,
anywhere?
an uncle,
Oh,
a teacher,
yeah.
and a friend. So it's a very joyous occasion for me to be able to present these ideas to you. I'd like to begin just by saying what the two key points of this short presentation are. The first point that I want to make, and that I want to try to describe the background to, is the point that Western mind science is beginning to recognize the need to incorporate mental training as a research tool. The second key point is that volition, or the experience of mental effort, seems to involve large-scale or global dynamic brain activity that can affect or modulate local processes, local activities. So these are the two key points. So to introduce the first key point, I want to make what I believe is an important conceptual distinction between mental plasticity on the one hand and neural plasticity on the other hand. In the case of mental plasticity, what we mean, first of all, modifiability of mental processes as a result of experience. This would be the most general sense of mental plasticity. Now, we've also talked about training and...
If I were to guess, I think when we're talking about neuroplasticity, we're talking much more granular. Like obviously, like neuroplasticity is involved regardless of whether you have any mental plasticity or not, or regardless of whether you learn or not learn anything, essentially, or noticeably. Obviously, we're constantly learning, but and then I'm guessing like mental plasticity here is going to be specifically where you're like meditation is an exercise in mental plasticity. It changes the way it changes the way that your mind works automatically in response to a very clear practice. So it's not simply just a manifestation of neuroplasticity, but it's also this mental plasticity. So that's what I'm guessing.
Practice as a route to those kinds of changes. For example, in skill acquisition, Richie mentioned some studies of music, and we could also use as another illustration learning a second language. But in particular, what we're interested in is mental training and practice. For example, the idea of attention and emotion as flexible skills that can be trained. So this is in particular the important notion of mental plasticity. Now, in the case of neuroplasticity, on the other hand, what we mean, or what is meant, is rather changes to brain structure, brain dynamics. And
okay, let me take this back. Not when I said that he was relatively young. This was in 2004. He probably looks a little different now.
Brain function as a result of environmental changes, both inside and outside the organism. And of course, over the past few days, we've seen a number of different kinds of examples of this notion. Now, shifting to the perspective of mind science,
I'm a little embarrassed. I totally missed the whole...
neuroplasticity, on the other hand, what we mean, or what is meant, is rather changes to...
Right.
Now, shifting to the perspective of mind science, an outstanding problem for mind science, in particular a methodological problem, a problem about how to carry out the investigation, is the issue of how we can study and investigate consciousness or first-person subjective experience, including mental plasticity, in relation to its neural embodiment, and in particular, of course, in relation to neuroplasticity. Now, given this methodological problem, a minimal approach is going to require that we rely on first-person reports about subjective experience. So the first-person perspective is essential. It's epistemologically and from the point of view of knowledge and from the point of view of method, methodologically essential. Now, this is an old idea in Western psychology and is obvious, I assume, from a Buddhist point of view, but it's only recently being acknowledged or recognized from the point of view of modern mind science, or what sometimes is called cognitive science. And this is an illustration that I'm going to use to try and describe how the importance of first-person subjective reports has come into the picture of mind science. If we think of this as the sphere of the organism or the person, really, a very classical perspective in psychology, in 20th century psychology, was known as behaviorism, in which really all you were interested in was stimulus and response, and you weren't allowed to talk about anything that intervened inside the system. Now, with the emergence of cognitive science, it became recognized that it was legitimate to talk about processes that intervened between stimulus and response, that had to do with cognition and emotion, but these processes were left disconnected from experience.
Can you elaborate on this? What do you mean by disconnect?
The assumption was that many kinds of cognitive processes could be carried out in the absence of conscious awareness. And of course, with the emergence of more sophisticated brain imaging tools, there also arose the idea that one could get a better...
Just to be clear, this, the disconnect between the cognitive and emotional processes and the experience, do you mean that what is occurring is opaque to the individual who's experiencing them? Or what exactly do you mean?
I could just add to that. There's a problem translation here, and that is when you take the term cognition and translate it into Tibetan. Cognition, of course, means a conscious event. I am cognizing that, I'm knowing that. So the notion that it's somehow I'm unconsciously cognizing something is a bit bizarre. And likewise for emotions. If you're not feeling an emotion, then why would you call it emotion? And so it's just it's kind of a translation issue.
We could say that there are certain processes that involve discriminations that the person makes. For instance, automatically recognizing certain sounds as speech sounds. So it's a discrimination, it's a very intelligent, high-level discrimination, but one has no awareness in particular of the process within one by which that's carried out. So the idea is that that process is an intelligent, cognitive process in the sense of knowing. It knows the speech sounds as language, but it proceeds largely in the absence of awareness.
I feel like that translation error also affects just people in Western cultures as well. We intuitively talk about emotion as something felt, and I would imagine that cognitive can also be considered in that same way. So it's important to always try to be precise with using like qualifiers or just further descriptors.
And then, of course, with the development of more sophisticated brain imaging tools, there's the functional brain imaging window on the neural activity that's associated with these kinds of processes. But now, if we're interested in experience in the sense of first-person subjective awareness, then we can't simply stay at the level of stimulus and response and unconscious processing. We now have to enlarge the perspective to include the idea that the person in an experiment is receiving a set of instructions that he or she understands in a certain way, second-person instructions we could call those, and is generating first-person subjective reports. So we need to include this level then, in addition to the idea of stimulus and response. So this is then the present situation, the present scientific situation, it's this full image. Now, a problem that's emerged for mind science today is that there's a recognition of the importance of first-person reports, but it's also known that naive or inexperienced first-person reports are subject to various biases.
Wow.
For example, one may retrospectively reconstruct the experience in such a way that biases certain aspects, that makes certain aspects of it more prominent than was the case at the time. There's another kind of problem, second bit of text here, which is that in inexperienced subjects, to generate these kind of reports about experience itself requires a kind of monitoring, a cognitive monitoring or tracking of experience. That this may change or interfere with experience itself. Because it's not stable, it may have a kind of intrusive and disruptive quality. So this is a kind of, you could say, a kind of measurement problem, that when you try to measure something, you affect what it is that you're measuring.
So yeah, that's almost, I think that would just be described as another bias. I think with what we know now about, like, it's not like It's not like quantum physics where you can't measure the thing without actually, without affecting it. In this case, it's like you're framing what you're trying to do in the report, and that will affect how you interpret what you felt. So we don't want to think about this as like there's a experience in itself, and then there's the interpretation that goes on to it, and perhaps different types of interpretation will muddy up what the original signal was. But there's only just the interpreted signal, and so however you frame, or however you're framed, whatever the prompt is for you paying attention to experience, that will affect what you see, what your brain will make appear for you. So that is a difficulty. Mind science needs to work with more refined first-person methods of mental training so that first-person reports can be based on skillful familiarity with mental life rather than causal inspection.
So these problems are starting to lead to the idea of a new approach, which is precisely that mind science needs to work with more refined first-person methods of mental training so that these first-person reports can be based on a kind of skillful familiarity with mental life rather than a kind of casual inspection or casual introspection that has this intrusive quality. Now, this is a diagram that actually I've modified a little bit from a diagram that Francisco used, and it's to try and represent various aspects of this idea of first-person methods. So in this diagram, there's several dimensions where we have, at this end, the beginner, and at this end, the master, with regard to the stability of the first person.
This is a crazy graph to show anyone.
This dimension is a dimension of time where the self-report could be generated immediately, that is very soon after the experience.
And it's also crazy that they're not letting us see it right now.
Calling on different kinds of processes of recall. This dimension here is actually a second-person dimension of the idea of a coach or trainer who can facilitate or help in this process of generating these more refined first-person reports. And again, this could range from kind of naive interlocutor to a more expert position. So within this space, one can then plot different kinds of first-person methods. And what I first want to draw your attention to is that Western mind science or cognitive science has really worked mainly in this little corner with first-person reports from naive subjects with largely naive interlocutors and often immediate self-reports. So this little area. But in contrast to that, one could envision a highly trained adept, highly trained in the sense of mental training, which would take in much, much more of this space, all of the various dimensions. So this, I think, is from the point of view of mind science, this opens up a very exciting possibility that so much more of this space of self-awareness becomes available when you have this idea of mental training and of mental adepts. So if we go back to our previous diagram, previous representation, we can now add a new pole, which is this pole of first-person methods of mental training at the other side, as it were, from the functional brain imaging. And this is precisely the idea behind what Francisco called neurophenomenology, where you have what he described as a reciprocity between the first-person perspective, particularly a disciplined first-person perspective with mental training, in tandem, that is informing functional brain imaging, which can then also feed back to inform the first-person perspective. So this is what he called a reciprocal circulation of first-person and third-person, and is the key idea of what he called neurophenomenology. And the work that Richie is going to be presenting at the end of the week will give some really nice empirical examples of this kind of approach. Okay, so just to summarize then, the first key point of this presentation: to investigate experience and its neural embodiment, the first-person perspective is essential. For mind science to move beyond casual introspection, it needs to employ first-person methods of mental training. Contemplative practices of mental training are exemplary for their pragmatic discipline and precision, and so very important in this context, and in particular can become a research tool for investigating experience and cognition, emotion, neuroplasticity. And I'm particularly summarizing in this way to try and point forward to Richie's presentation on Friday. Right, now I would like to come to the second key point of this presentation, and this is a kind of outstanding conceptual and empirical problem which focuses on the voluntary conscious aspect of mental activity. So the question then is, how does sustained voluntary conscious mental activity affect brain structure and function? And this question has both an empirical side and a conceptual side. On the empirical side, one wants to know to what extent mental practices or mental training affect the brain by virtue of being voluntary and conscious. Or in other words, what causal contribution does conscious volition make?
So in other words, to give an example of someone meditating on impermanence, say from the Buddhist point of view, what you're trying to tease out is what element of that effect comes from simple voluntary, sort of wish to do the practice. Is that the point?
Exactly. There's the wish and the volitional aspect that's involved in actually executing it and carrying it out. So that's an empirical question. But there's also a conceptual side to the issue, which has to do with what is the right way to conceptualize or to think about volition and what Western philosophers call intentional causation within a scientific framework.
Oh.
Can you explain that a bit?
Okay. In order to explain that, maybe I should give a little bit of background. The dominant way of thinking about
So this is what we've attempted to do in the document. We've attempted to conceptualize volition. So
intentionality in Western philosophy, certainly, is the idea that there is an agent or a self that's distinct that is the source of the volition or the intention. Now,
this is not how we do it.
this idea runs into a lot of problems when you look at the complexity of brain processes, because there's really no place to find that kind of an agent or self. Now, I understand, of course, this is not a problem from the Buddhist point of view, but it's left Western philosophers and scientists with the perplexing issue of how to reconceptualize intentional causation in the absence of this, in the obvious absence of this kind of agency or selfhood.
empirical question to that. Empirical
This is so interesting. So does he have like an earpiece in where he's getting live translation and then he's asking questions? Or can he understand vocalized English but can't speak it well? I'm guessing it's the prior. I feel like the second one would be unlikely. This has to be such an interesting experience for Thompson here.
The problem with agency is not just confined to Western philosophy. Someone was saying it's a problem for the Buddhist philosophy as well.
And just a little bit more translation, and that is even in Buddhism, as Zolman said, I think earlier today, in Buddhism does not simply refute the self altogether. It doesn't say there is no self at all. We do, on a conventional or relative level, assert the existence of self, but then as soon as you say there is a self, then what's the basis or an instance of the self? Not just a word floating in midair with no referent. What's the referent of the self? And even there, then there's a lot of discussion in Buddhism about the referent of the self. If you're going to talk about it, it either has a referent or not. And so it's still a subtle issue even in Buddhism that doesn't go on the kind of the Western track.
Wow.
All right, now what I want to do is to describe very
He didn't even respond. Oh,
briefly a current approach to this problem of volitional causation in mind science and in Western philosophy. And the starting idea is that given the orientation, that the principles of mind science, volition and intentional causation need to be understood as having a biological basis in the brain. Now, I want to introduce what I'm going to say with a simple example, a simple experiential example, and I hope that this will work. If you see this is a two-dimensional line drawing, and most people, when they look at it, see it as a cube. But if you focus on this intersection here for a while, I hope something will happen. Exactly. So what you see is that when you focus here, this can appear as a corner that's far away, or as a corner that's far away and down, or as a corner that's close and upwardly oriented. Now, this figure spontaneously oscillates in this manner, but you can also volitionally shift it. That is, with a little practice, if one focuses here and one imagines or makes the mental effort to pull this corner forward, you can make it pop. I want to say
Very
several things about this example. First, notice that nothing on the screen, that is in the external world, is changing. What changes is rather, especially in the volitional case where you move it, as it were, yourself, what's changing is your intentional attitude towards it. So there's a volitional shift in attention that involves an experience of mental effort that's entirely endogenous, that's within.
What was false? Why are you going at Thompson like that?
So that's one point. Then second point is we know from visual science, from cognitive neuroscience, that the perception of a very simple figure like this involves many different brain areas. It involves areas at the back of the brain, the occipital cortex, that have to do with the perception of line orientation and brightness and color and visual shape. It involves areas in the temporal cortex that have to do with
That's a
object
cube on the
categorization and
floor,
recognition.
buddy.
So this is a cube, for instance.
Won't pop out because Newton said so. Imagine just completely derailing the presentation on that one point.
And it involves frontal and prefrontal areas that have to do with attention, with focused attention. So there's this complex, distributed pattern of activity. And when you shift it, when you pull it forward, presumably there's a shift in all of these networks from one pattern of activity to another. So it's a large-scale and global transition. And we can...
Oh, he's dropping the global word? Oh my gosh, in 2004. Also, this is hilarious. Because, like, why is... So what I think is going on...
Imagine we can just illustrate
I'll pause it when the thing comes up
brain
again.
Areas that
Yeah, so this has to be some type of convention in India in 2004 where Thompson, who has studied what he calls neurophenomenology, and he studied that with Francisco Varela. I was going to say Valera. Francisco Varela, who is known for introducing the concept of autopoiesis to biology and for co-founding this institute to promote dialogue between science and Buddhism. So you could see that Thompson is continuing this effort in this video. But the reason why we're here is because when I was asking ChatGPT who out there has a similar type of view about these things that we do here, or at least that I do here, they pointed me in the direction of neurophenomenology. So that's why I'm watching. I'm trying to see what Thompson's all about, because Thompson was actually already in the document. It was already in the to-do here. Of the enactive approach to cognition with the late Francisco Varela. So yeah, I guess they were a part of the 4E. The embodied mind. This is a long time ago. Mind and life. 2015. Waking, dreaming, being, self-conscious in neuroscience, self and consciousness in neuroscience, meditation and philosophy. Explores consciousness across waking, dreaming, and meditative states, comparing neuroscientific findings with Tibetan Buddhism. Man, we got to get Dharmadam on this. We need someone to make the connection here. When is the first episode of the podcast being uploaded? The first episode of our podcast? Like the podcast associated with me and this channel and this document? I think it's going to have to be once you could bring on a Buddhist monk and a neuroscience professor. It's a good question. If I should just start a podcast, it would probably be 2026, and it would be... we should probably be big enough that we could no, you know what? We don't need anyone big. We don't need any huge names. We just need people that are interested. I think I would need, you know what? Before we start the podcast, I need a lineup of people that I would be interested in talking to that may or may not have, any sized audience. You know, they could be small or big. It just needs to be someone who I feel like we could have a positive conversation. Also, the other thing with the podcast is it might benefit us to wait until we're a little bit farther on our part 2 stuff so that we can actually get part 2 discussions from that. Given that I don't want this to just be a philosophy circle jerk. This has to be useful in some way. So we could go. I think the nice thing about this channel is we can go any direction anyone wants to go, provided it's practical or philosophical. We could go in the moral direction. We could go any way we want. Brandon, I don't even think Brandon would be a good guest. I don't even know if I'd want to talk to Brandon. I don't know what we would talk about. Like what he's focused on is very specific, and it's like a certain type of science that we are going to, we leverage, obviously. I definitely am influenced by that, but I'm not. Kendrick Lamar. Oh, I would talk to Kendrick Lamar easily. I mean, he would be like an optimal guest almost. Like ideally, once we get big, it's going to be, okay, who can we talk to about like what should we be doing? Not like collectively, but like what they and me, what we should be doing. And then maybe also collectively, like what should we do what should we be doing as a community, I should say, that would benefit everyone involved and more. Mr. O'Connor, I've told you that Mr. Richardson is very busy at the moment. Oh my gosh, please wait for an email. I offered Alex the video idea. I'll wait for him. If it takes 3 years or if it takes 5 years, you know, I'll wait. I don't need to go deep into, actually I do have to go deep into logical fallacies regardless, but I don't have to go deep into that type of video because we really don't need to go deep into that for the document.
Come integrated in a transient and dynamical way when you make this volitional attentional
Oh my God, he's dropping the word transient and dynamical.
shift. And this is called dynamic large-scale integration. So the hypothesis then, one hypothesis, this is in very, very general terms, is that conscious volition is or involves a dynamic and global systemic feature of the whole brain. It's not as if there's one specific volitional system. It involves a whole shifting pattern of activity. And it emerges from the large-scale coherence, that is the way that these activities hold together over time, these distributed activities. It emerges from the large-scale coherence of local and distributed activities, those different brain areas, but it in turn globally shapes and constrains those local activities.
It's like, this is literally what I said in the video. Man, Thompson's been on this. I couldn't tell if your t-shirt was an ice cream, light bulb, or a sunset, but I think it's a sunset. I think it's Sam Harris's face or his head. Not Waking Up. Actually, Waking Up used to be, it was the book, but I'm talking about Waking Up, the Huberman. Oh my gosh. Look at that. Oh, we got new ones? Foil. I don't know if I like that one. That one I can't wear out in public. What is going on here? That's actually pretty sweet, but I don't think I want to wear that out in public. Oh, that's kind of sick. Also pretty weird to wear, but this one's always going to be weird. Do they not sell the original shirt anymore? Oh, what is this? Flower head. This is creepy. With the teeth here. It's a head, a speech mark. Why can't you wear that out in public? Which I just thought it was a little too loud for me. I like to go minimal. The headless way. Oh, look at that. That's incredible. Oh, this is it. This is the one. That's pretty cool. That you would never guess what it is. But I think that's pretty sweet, honestly. $40? Yeah. That's pretty wild. Apparel. There it is. Vintage black. That's the one. Though I don't feel like this is black. I feel like this is like a gray. So, who knows? Who knows what's up with that? Oh, can we get some accessories? Oh, I should get the mug. I need more. Oh, the cosmic mug. Let's get the cosmic mug. The issue is that I usually hold it like this, so no one's ever going to see it. Oh, the hat. The trucker hat. All right, well. Artist collection. Nice. Begin again. Oh, there's the cosmic mug. Okay. North Star mug. Pretty cool. Looking heads. Whoa. This is pretty neat, honestly. I would wear this. That's pretty funny. What is this? For the one who's looking for... Ah. For the one who is looking. Looking for the one who is. Who is looking for the one? That's a really cool... That's a really cool design. Oh my gosh, I want to buy this now. 40? I would do it for 40. That's because so the idea being that like part of a lot of Sam's meditations is, oh, and it's got the head in the middle in the eye. Yo, this is wonderful. The idea is that it's hard to find the person who's looking when you're paying attention in your mind, like who is the subject here. And like, you know, this just goes to Sam's whole thing of like how this any time you try to look for the self or try to find the self, you're getting this like reduced image of you know, it's an object. You've objectified the self at that point. Oh, what happened here? Why did we lose a... Oh. How do I do that? What's my take on BlackRock? What is BlackRock? What is BlackRock? Global investment management financial services company that provides... I have no idea anything about BlackRock. I don't know what they do. What do they do exactly? There's oregano. You'd have buy a bunch of large bottles, but then you see a pre-mixed Italian seasoning container. You have to buy one small bottle. You know how people talk about investing in the S&P 500? One way to do that is to buy one share each of 500 companies. But that's expensive and a giant pain in the butt to manage. The more popular way is to buy a share of an S&P 500 index fund. Someone buys one share of 500 companies, combines them all, and divides them into a bunch of bite-sized pieces that contain a small amount of each. And it's distributed by how large the companies are. The three big companies that do this are Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock. Their S&P 500 premix seasoning containers are called that. So if it's just like another one of these companies, then I don't know if... Oh, they're good then. They're AUM. What does AUM mean?
This could...
Oh, no.
Coming soon on video and DVD.
Minister of Propaganda and Social Media. In recent years, BlackRock has been combating his evil. How could we be the bad guys? No one speaks ill of Black to, you know, the island or the, you know, this big road.
How do you find these videos? This is crazy. It's absolutely dominating. Or has it always been this guy? I make silly garbage vids for fun. Hell yeah. Assets under management. Okay. I've always been a Vanguard guy myself. But I imagine they just do the same thing. So it really doesn't matter. Unless they have slightly different versions of these things and someone performs better than the other. But even then, you're at this point, you're still just speculating. Unless they always did better, and then you would probably always want to go with the one that did better. You seem like I'm a risk-averse investor, and I don't know how responsible it is right now, given that we may or may not be in this huge bubble, and the S&P is quite saturated with AI. Like if AI does poorly right now, the S&P 500 is not diversified. So that's a real issue. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But I don't think I should time the market. I used to read 10K filings from front to back. Oh my gosh. What are 10K filings? Like, why would a filing be like a 10K filing?
So what's going on in the occipital areas and in the temporal areas is a function of the whole pattern.
Regulatory
It's not
annual
just locally
reports,
determined. It's a whole
nice.
pattern that shapes what's locally
Were
happening.
you into that day trading game? Because that stuff seemed exhilarating. But I just wouldn't be. I feel like it requires so much work. You'd have to be so close to the pulse all the time. Like that would have to be your job. That doesn't work, at least not for most people, right? And then also you'd probably, oh, tried left. Oh no. You'd have to have like algorithms and stuff helping you out. Where were we? Were we here?
Which leads to coherence. That from the large scale coherence, that is the way that these activities hold together over time, these distributed activities, it emerges from the large scale coherence of local and distributed activities, those different brain areas, but it in turn globally.
Where I'm a security analysis guy, okay, where risk averseness is based on a margin of safety. Huh. So is there like a certain range of safety or risk averseness or a range of risk that like is known to be fine? Or is that, does it really just come down to who's investing?
Shapes and constrains those local activities. So what's going on in the occipital areas and in the temporal areas is a function of the whole pattern. It's not just locally determined. There's a whole pattern that shapes what's locally happening. And this is a kind of reciprocal causation or reciprocal interaction, which leads to two ideas that are very important in this context, which I believe came up in the previous Mind and Life meeting, which are the ideas of emergence and reciprocal causation. So emergence is this idea of the arising of a global pattern. But what's important to emphasize here is that emergence is two-way. Francisco used to put it this way. He used to say all avenues are two-way, all roads go in both directions. In this case, what this means is that you need the local processes as the basis for the global processes. But the global processes are also the basis for the local ones. They sustain them and they shape them.
Oh my gosh. Reciprocal causality. All right.
Is then a kind of reciprocal causality, a kind of bidirectional global local causality. So it follows from this way of thinking that interventions at a global level can bring about local effects.
Because when you say causation, generally, there's a temporal sequence. Cause precedes and effects ensue. But if you say mutual causation, then you get the impression that it's the causation going both ways at the same time. Is that the implication? Or is it more of a kind of a loose usage?
That's an excellent question. This gets a little complicated. So
You have to go more granular because, yeah, this is where the global workspace theory really helps because it shows the process of ignition, which we simplified in the video. But the philosophy itself came out from Benjamin Graham, okay. After he and his friends experienced the Great Depression, okay. So Benjamin Graham, he's got that book, right? He's got the, is it The Intelligent Investor? That book in high school we called the Bible. The basic idea is that the market rate is not what you ought to buy, but the future value of the money that a business or stock produces. Okay, so if you calculate or estimate that the intrinsic value of a stock is $20, but it's selling for $30, then you wouldn't buy it. This is easier said than done, of course. The idea is that the margin between the intrinsic value of $20 and the price you buy, say $10, provides you with security. It's what Dr. Michael J. Burry follows, right? The Intelligent Investor is a bit old. Security analysis is more in depth. Okay, nice. Yeah, The Intelligent Investor was like a real old book. All right, so what's your take on Burry stepping away from his fund? because he had mentioned that he was not shorting, but he was what you call it, putting. He was doing. He had put options. I don't know what the word. I'm really not that far into the economic space. I literally just learned enough personal finance just to figure out what was safe to do without what was safe to do unconsciously for the rest of my life. That's really all I needed to know. And then I moved to I don't know what I did. What was the thing I did next? I think there was like a year gap before I did philosophy stuff. Jordan Peterson was 2017. Personal finance was 2015. What was 2016? What was I doing in 2016? I think I was just having fun in college, honestly.
The local, global, at any given instant, the way that the global acts on the local is different from the way that the local sustains the global. That is, at any given moment, the global constrains or shapes, limits the degrees of freedom of the local processes, while the local interactions are what support and sustain the global pattern. So it's a different kind of causal relation from local to global and global to local. Okay, so the hypothesis then would be that in generating a volitional mental state, large-scale brain activity shifts from one coherent global pattern to another one, as in the case of the cube, where you shift from C.
And this isn't like the whole entire global pattern shifts one at a time. It's each of these local, what are we calling these? Local, I said systems, local networks. They're changing their patterns in response to what's coming in from the global and also what's coming in from stimuli. And that is like those changes, those ignitions from the local is actually constituting the global. So the global is like changing in very small ways based on the different changes of the local. And yeah, that's the neural trajectory that we were talking about in the video.
Seeing it far away to seeing it close up, shifts from one coherent pattern to another one, and thereby entrains the local processes. By entrain, I mean it carries them into a particular pattern, or you can think of it as like molecules in a whirlpool get sucked into a particular overall pattern of activity. And
this idea of the local getting sucked into the pattern that the global is literally just another way to describe how the local is getting information from the global. So this is how like a language part of our brain will literally get the stimuli. I wouldn't say that, but get the visual information once I've already, I've taken the stimuli. I've done things at in the local visual centers, and that's supplied the global with information. And now like my linguistic local networks are now constrained by that, in the sense that they now have they're operating with that information, and then they're outputting whatever. So we could see how this whole thing is deterministic in a sense, yet we could say that it's also intentional. Like the whole thing has to be intentional in itself. That's the only way we could think about intentionality. But when we talk about intentionality, usually we want to conceptualize it in a way where we can connect it to some sense of ourself, even though that might be like inappropriate at some level. This is why in the document we talk about volition through a predictive processing sense, where we kind of highlight dopamine as this approach, like it's an approach motivator. So this is why like volition is always inherent in our activity, or in our what you're doing in every single moment. There's always a approach type of activity happening, which you could also interpret as a intending to do something, or to see something, or to understand something in a certain way. So you could always think of intentionality and predictive processing like hand in hand in this very much fundamental, unconscious way of existing in the world. Okay, I think my cutoff is 8:15.
This is an attempt to illustrate this idea where you have,
I'm
at any
getting
given moment,
summoned.
this reciprocity of local and global interactions. And as a result of that, the system as a whole shifts from one global pattern to another. This is a kind of state transition, like the flipping of the cube in the perception. So generating a mental state, then, would be a way of intervening, that is volitionally generating a mental state, would be a way of intervening at a global level so as to affect local changes, so as to effect local changes. Or you could say that volition mobilizes and channels brain activity. It moves it in a particular direction, according to this way of thinking. But,
To effect. I'm curious why you did that.
according to this way of thinking, and channels brain activity. It moves it in a particular direction, according to this way of thinking. Effect local change. To affect local changes, so as to effect local changes. Or you could say that volition...
So as to effect. Verb. What is the effect verb? To bring something about or cause to happen. It is different from the more common verb to affect, which means to influence or change something, as in, okay, to bring something about or to cause it to happen. I see. So affect is a little more broad, where you're influencing something more generally, but this is to effect is to bring something about.
Volition mobilizes level, so as to affect local changes, so as to effect local changes. Or you could say that volition mobilizes and channels brain activity. It moves it in a particular direction, according to this way of thinking.
Oh, I gotta listen to this whole thing again because I just went on that whole rant. Yo, Filcher, what's good? Effect means make happen. Okay, nice. Thank you very much for that. Hi, by the way. We're just in here talking about economics, personal finance, and neuroplasticity and neurophenomenology. Just the usual Twitch. Usually what you find on Twitch, right?
Would be a way of intervening, that is volitionally generating a mental state, would be a way of intervening at a global level.
So this happened.
as
This
to
was in
affect
2004,
changes, so as to effect
and
local
I'm
changes.
pretty stoked that it's got a lot of the stuff that we just talked about in the most recent consciousness video, talking about local and global information in the brain.
Or you could say that volition mobilizes
But
and channels brain activity.
specifically in the context of volition, like he's trying to think about intentionality, like what is intentionality in the most fundamental sense in the brain.
Generating a mental state would be a way of intervening at a global level, so as to affect local changes, so as to effect local changes. Or you could say that volition mobilizes and channels brain activity. It moves it in a particular direction, according to this way of thinking. But as a philosopher, I feel obliged to say, though this may not please some of the neuroscientists, that this idea still needs much more development, and at present, there remains a kind of gap, an explanatory gap,
Wow.
between this dynamic picture of brain activity and the
Yo,
experiential
look at
character
this.
of conscious volition from the first-person perspective. That is, we can see a kind of correlational connection between these two things, but that's the extent of the bridge at this point, so there remains a kind of gap in attempting to relate these two levels. So where I would like to end is with some open questions from this perspective to the Buddhist point of view. And first question would be, from the Buddhist perspective, in
Right,
Buddhist psychology, what is volition?
So we do actually, like in the document, we make a case about volition as some inherent intentionality. Like it's not that we make a case; it's that we come up with a conceptualization that makes sense of it. Implicit activity, agency, intentionality. Right. Oh, this part's so cool as well. I miss the document. It's only been like 6 months, but I miss it. We can propose a way of framing the fundamental unconscious activity implicit in our experience. Unlike concrete actions that we can easily observe, like speaking or walking, our moment-to-moment sense-making happens automatically. However, upon reflection, as we've mentioned, we can explicitly characterize this activity. We have so far used terms such as recognize, interpret, and understand to describe this continuous act of engagement in the experience of meaning. When we recognize some aspect of the world, we usually do not simultaneously recognize that we are recognizing it. We engage in this implicit activity automatically, shaping our experience without needing to be explicitly acknowledged. Keeping with our recent insights about the fundamental connection between our self-understanding and the way we experience meaning, we can conceptualize this implicit activity as an act of commitment. When we recognize something, we take it to be a certain way. For example, to recognize a chair is to commit to it as a chair, with all that entails. This framing allows us to see even the most basic acts of perception as a form of agency, a constant implicit assertion about the way the world is, imbued with the affective conviction that arises from our predictive processes. Oh my gosh. So fun. Oh yeah, and then we brought this back to normative too. And so, okay, this perspective reveals an inextricable link between our participation in meaning and our grasp of a determinate semantic world. The act of recognizing anything at all carries an implicit commitment that our understanding is oriented toward a world that is structured and knowable. When we take an object to be a chair, we commit to its existence as such, not just as a fleeting subjective impression, but as a determinate part of the world. Like this is truth, right? Like when I see something and I interpret it in a certain way, I'm committing to it as true. Yeah, in doing so, we commit to the semantic structure that gives the concept its meaning. If we identify an animal as a cat, our commitment necessarily includes its incompatibility with being a dog. In this framework, our subjective agency is thus always already bound by these relations of possibility, impossibility, and consequence that structure our intelligible world. So once again, we're just making sense of the automatic stuff that happens that we really can ground in neuroscience, and we can just say that this stuff just pragmatically plays itself out. But we're conceptualizing what's going on using words that we kind of understand. So intentionality is a way, like we're trying to connect our intuitive notion of intentionality with all the stuff that we know that goes on underneath. You now have multiple quality presets, by the way. I think Twitch upgraded your status. Yo. For real? So I had reached the criteria, or I had accomplished the criteria that allows me to apply for affiliate, but I didn't. Yo, Daniel M, what's good? Stanifestation, the manifestation. Yo, that's great. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I didn't accept anything from their end, so I'm glad that they're giving me stuff. I had a narrower interest when I was studying brain metabolism in 2024, but it bears on volition. One of the more interesting findings is that brain activity seems to be shaped by direct vascular flow, concentrating glucose to some blood vessels and restricting it to others. And that's what happens physiologically when we direct our own thought. It gets harder to maintain vascular flow over time, which shows as mental fatigue. That's when concentration fails. That's really cool. All right, I'm gonna just gank that. I'm gonna gank that quote if you don't mind, and I'm gonna just throw it in our to-do. I'm gonna put it in the to-do of specifically the implicit activity and agency section. And we need to look into this as an example. So the way that we go and the direction we take in this section is one that aligns with the free energy principle and predictive processing. Like that's always the way I go. The way I think it works is that most streams, or at least the ones at the bottom, got to only have one quality presets. The multiple quality presets were reserved for a few streams, either that when there were enough resources or because of affiliate or something. I'm not too sure though, but you have them. Woo! Moving up in the world. I thought so too. I could get a source. Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, I will gladly add the source as well. I'm sure I could throw that into ChatGPT also, and it could probably give us a few sources of where we should look. But yeah, that's some really cool stuff to really like ground these processes. Okay, to further open this perspective up to the normative side of our conceptual understanding, we can consider this activity as making judgments. When we commit to the world being a certain way, we are making an implicit judgment about how it ought to be interpreted according to the norms we have internalized. According to our internalized norms. Our discussion of the normative structure of understanding allows us to see these commitments as deeply aligned with our socially induced learning. We judge the world in ways that have been shaped and reinforced by our participation in a shared community of meaning. We must keep in mind that such commitments and judgments are themselves a manifestation of our implicit understanding and our broader predisposition. The powerful feeling of certainty that accompanies a fluent recognition is the experiential effect of our predictive processing, resolving prediction error at a granular level and reinforcing our commitment to the world being as we take it to be. So this is highlighting the active inference side of predictive processing. The fact that we act in the world to match our predictions. Did Stream Elements just double us up? That's pretty funny. Thus, our most fundamental sense of the world's intelligibility is not merely an abstract philosophical stance, but a biologically reinforced and experientially validated commitment. Crucially, as we discussed, this process forms a continuous dynamic feedback loop. Every commitment we make, shaped by our past, also helps to shape our future. The experience of meaning that arises from a judgment affects our underlying neurodynamic processes, subtly reinforcing or revising the schematic pathways that produced it. Thus, each act of understanding functions as a moment of learning that retunes our predisposition, influencing the very commitments we are likely to make in the next moment. And then this is where we get to intention. Consequently, we can consider how our commitments are inherently intentional. They are oriented towards coherence. We are driven to act, both physically and cognitively, by directing attention in ways that make our sensory experience align with our predictive models. When we commit to the world being a certain way, our intentionality is expressed in the way we engage with the world to confirm and sustain that commitment, ensuring our experience remains coherent. Furthermore, we can now consider how our commitments make us responsible. By making a commitment, by judging the world to be a certain way, we reconfigure our own predictive understanding. We are now responsible for that commitment in the sense that our own system is predisposed to predict that the world will conform to it. We are now liable to our own future experience. If the world violates our commitment, it is our own system that will register the prediction error, the felt dissonance of a failed judgment. This intimate accountability to the consequences of our own past commitments is the very essence of our ongoing affective experience of predictive processing. Yeesh. Crazy stuff. All right. Let's get back to the actual video. Hopefully it doesn't come off tacky that I get so excited by this document. The first two. All right, let's jump back to that. Here, okay. Here we go. Oh, we got Clark in here. I don't know if this is the same Clark I'm familiar with. The first two bibliographic entries I'm going to paste below relate to. Okay. Let's get this in here. Nice. Oh, I see. So let's do that. Let's do this. And let's do this. Oh, wrong one. Which one was the wrong one? Is the third one not? Should I not grab the third one? Is this correct now? We got circulation, how energy. Just doubled it up. Oh, I see. Oh, it is literally the same exact one. I see. Mental fatigue. Awesome. Thank you very much. I don't know when we're going to get to these. We'll get to them eventually. It's going to stay in here until we do. We have so much stuff we have to do, unfortunately. But it's solidified now, so. Oh, we got a Dr. K video. Watch Destiny's talk with Dr. K for their take on Objective. I don't know if this is just for discussion or if I thought that there was something useful to include. Because I think I listened to that a while back. So Sokolov is a major figure in neurology. His 1950 paper, Brain Metabolism, had a major influence in the field. Nice. Yeah, one thing to look out for, though, I mean, this is pretty new, and this is, I mean, I guess these are relatively new, is to see if, like, has someone integrated this and then, like, even added more, more contemporary context to these findings. Given that so much has happened since 1999. That's a 20, right, like this is some new stuff. I mean, granted, stuff has happened in the last 10 years, but this is like really new compared to a 2005, 1999. That said, we should check it all out. Sunny et al. Yep, very recent. They're empirical. I don't know. I agree. What I'm saying is that someone's going to take their empirical findings and then like further. Like include those with even newer empirical findings and say, hey, because of all this evidence, we can give an even clearer idea of what's going on. So it's not to take away from the findings of these. It's just, you know, we can even give more context to these findings when we're you know, we could give a clearer picture. You know, these frameworks are effective with evidence. Like you could probably, you could describe the brain in many different ways that are valid, and the question is which framework actually does integrate all this evidence in the most coherent way. So, but I'm sure they've all got gold in them. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We gotta figure it all out. That's what we're doing here. All right, we've got 10 minutes basically. Oh, and unfortunately, I think I have to. I don't think I'm gonna be able to go do stuff tomorrow. Like I think I have to delete this, unfortunately. So we might be. I'll probably be doing stuff Saturday and Sunday. If not Saturday, then Sunday. But unfortunately, we got 2 weeks where, I mean, next week because of Thanksgiving, but 2 weeks where I've got these guys gone. But then we'll be back, and I'll probably be doing full weeks until the Christmas week. This will probably be, I'll probably be on vacay. But yeah. And then once January hits, it's like I probably have nothing going on for a while. And we'll be in the trenches then. We'll be back. We need to get back to the trenches. All right.
And how does it
10 more minutes of this
work? How are its workings conceptualized? Specifically, how do Buddhist models of the mind describe and account for the effects that volitional mental processes may have on the brain and the body? And then final question, what are the similarities and differences between the Buddhist concept of dependent origination and Western scientific concepts of emergence and reciprocal causation?
No, معشرنا يعني عندي فوديشن زي هذا اسمه سامبل بروبرتي ده اسمه سامبل دي يعني مو كده زي هذا إنه كل شيء كده اسمه سامبل لا كده جب ثمن كده جب ثمن هاجم ده شيء هذا إني بدي من كرسا
I'm trying to notice like his
the
reactions. Like if this is like a master yogi, like how would they react to normal like social like perhaps I'm going way perhaps yogis aren't like completely desocialized, but they they have to have their chances are they have their emotional responses like very much in check in such a way that I think would be interesting.
뭐 도시를 보러 봐. 스무 살도 거는 스무 살도 거는 내가 지게 거는 지게 세계에 나 자고 지거라. 그놈 이게 자고져야 돼. 그건 슈트 간다 싶어 그랬어.
It makes it super.
어,
Super.
맥스 틀렸어.
꿀론다 쓰면 카드 거래.
아,
꿀론다 쓰면 카드 거래.
스무 샘플로.
어. 나는 예중 그냥라서 전주성 그냥라서 저기 해내 미시다 지금 미다고 보면 동네가 뭐 되게 그러야. 난 미다고 보면 약간 약간 누드 괜히 스무 살밖에 안 돼. 스무 살이 아니야. 심 미다고. 미다고 순간 제일 유산에
네.
스무 살이 아니야.
네.
스무 살밖에 미다고 하면 수비한테 그런 게 아니죠.
맞아.
맞아. 근데 제일 유산 미다고 보면
Wonder when we get a response here.
스무 살이 시작 보니까.
Imagine they just have like a side conversation and Thompson's just like, come on guys, let me know what's going on here. Is a thought leader no less convivial than a major church figure. Wow.
스무 샘플구나.
나는 미다고 되냐 거냐지. 여기 연락 가버리면 미다고 돈 썼어.
I imagine they practice a little bit what they preach. Though I guess you'd hope, yeah, I don't know. I guess with a church figure, you'd assume that they're moral, but then obviously we see church figures do things that we know to be immoral. So I don't know. I'd imagine though, like a huge part of Buddhism is the practice. I would hope that they do the practice. He'd be as articulate and social as a cardinal or bishop. Right. Okay. So then, yeah, they would be quite social still. Perhaps the only thing we'd be concerned about is that they're so entrenched in one way of describing these things because that's how they communicate all the time, which is kind of what I need to deal with. I got to figure that one out. I don't want to get too far into the weeds. If I guess we're always in a good position because the way that we hold this framework is not one of certainty. It's always one of interpretation of needs to be improved, etc. Yeah, cross-cultural, but the basic truths transcend tradition. Oh, nice.
또 evolution 공룡 교회나 공룡
딱 그놈이야. 나는 그게 뭔가 그거 영상.
또 공룡
All right, how are we getting to the?
맞다 맨날 공룡
제가 답변.
Yeah, we can continue. One is one of the classic 51 mental factors within Buddhist psychology. It's called Semba in Tibetan, and that is almost invariably translated as volition or intention. But there's another term that crops up a lot, especially I think in Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan here is Kunlong, which is almost invariably translated as motivation. So the discussion here is in your context where you're using the word volition, do we want to use this very technical Buddhist psychological term that crops up mostly in that context, or do we want to use the term that appears a whole lot in Buddhist meditation literature? I mean, it's very, very widely used, of motivation. And then the question comes here: are these equivalent, or if they're not equivalent, exactly how do we parse them apart? There's also the issue of different levels of motivation. For example, when you start an enterprise, there's the causal motivation that gets you launched. But when you're in the midst of the enterprise, all other types, a variety of other aspirations and motivations may slip in from moment to moment to moment. So the actual temporal, so to speak,
This is
one year from moment to moment.
This is way too high level for, like high level in terms of high abstraction for what Thompson was getting at, which is the same thing as what I just read. This is like a very low level fundamental motivator, right? Like the idea of the free energy principle is so low level. This is affecting all behavior, all thought, etc. It's not like a interpretive lens on top that is high enough level to start talking about like what I'm actually doing. in the world, like starting a business or whatnot.
Be quite different. You may start with one motivation and then continue with another one. So there's seem to be a lot of gradations and nuances in these, and exactly how we're going to equate this with your question so we can answer it well is a kind of a translator's dilemma.
그걸 개화치고 되고 유구는 인식구나 유구는 그다음에 샘플은 개화치 샘플은 되는 게 개발자다 내 되고 자화치 구야 유구는 인식
All right, we got to find it again.
Activity.
Oh.
So for example, you may begin some type of an enterprise, some type of activity, with a motivation of compassion. So that's your causal, your launching motivation, so to speak.
Yeah,
Then you get an
they're
amazing-
missing
something very
they're missing the not the point, but the level
and you make it quite irritated.
of
That
abstraction that
irritation
this
keeps you going.
guy's trying to.
And so now the
push
irritation or
here.
anger or frustration, that is really quite antithetical to your initial motivation. But in a manner of speaking, the activity is the same, and the stream of activity is the same, but the motivation has shifted radically, even in ways that are incompatible with each other. Compassion and, let's say, anger.
참 꿀렁이던 가
가야지.
무슨 안 주고 안 주고
The speed is doing that guy dirty. It looks like he's like blinking every
This
few milliseconds.
used term is motivation. So in practice, once again, the much more commonly used term is motivation, and the inspection of motivation, the care of the motivation, the reparation or repairing motivation is really crucially important. So in all the practice literature, I think you find very few references to the psychological term of semba or volition, but an enormous emphasis, extraordinary emphasis on motivation. So His Holiness is suggesting here that perhaps the psychological term of semba or volition is something that's rather tightly confined, and that is, right now I'm directing my attention to your face, but no, then I think I'll look at Michael, and now I'm feeling
That's
on you.
what we're looking for.
This can all be taking place intentionally, but this is this momentary event of directing the attention. So one kind of technical definition of volition is that simply that which is
A little
directing
closer.
where your mind goes, right? But that on the one hand, on the other hand, why did you come here? What was your reason for accepting the invitation? Those seem to be
That's
rather
higher
different
level,
types of
yeah.
mental processes. One is very rich, complex, and the other one seems to be momentary, just directing your attention here and there.
내가 내주는 쌤 유신을 처리하죠. 예수님 쓰시고. 그러나 메타보로 원 주면 고광면 잡았다. 시작하고 싶어.
So what happens for the rest of this? Is this 10 minutes of just of them chit-chatting here?
This particular term in intention, which is part of the 51 mental list of mental factors, according to this particular system of Abhidhamma or Buddhist Abhidhamma Samujaya, is that it's really defined as that faculty of mind which really directs the attention from one.
I think
to
we
another.
need Dharmadam
So here,
to
His Holiness
give us the
does not
full
reflect
rundown
very
here.
strongly the English term volition as you define, because the volition has a certain intentionality, some kind of deliberate will on the part of the individual. So one can imagine a meditator who's really focused on impermanence or death. Then all of a sudden his mind is distracted, and latches onto something else. So in that instance, there is this intention, that this one of the 51 mental factors, even if
All right, we got
just a much
to move past here.
Buddhist term, need not as omnipresent. In other words, every mental state would have those 5 present at least. So within these, there are this what we translate as intention or volition is there. There is another one which we translate as attention. So we're trying to distinguish these. Yeah. See,
And the point we are maybe erroneously translating as volition is always active. So you may be wanting to attend to something, and then I see, but Michael moved his head, and now something happened. My attention is shifting over there, and Buddhist psychology would say there is still this mental factor of so-called volition that shifted the attention over there. So I think it does not correspond very well for you.
Well, can I just ask one question? How do you know?
How do you know what?
How do you know that the mental factor of volition is still present at the instant that your attention is distracted?
Wondering who asked that question.
Generally, this is speaking for myself, these mental factors are really defined in terms of the function of a particular mental state. So any given moment, mental state would have functions, that it would have an intentionality, it would have a certain effective qualitative experience that accompanies that process. So these mental factors are really distinguished on the basis of what characteristics will be present when a mental state occurs. So these are not separate streams of thought processes or mental processes. They are really part of one package.
I feel like that can easily be mapped onto the discussion Thompson just made about the global, like some global intentionality versus the individual local, you could say the individual local intentionalities, and the global constrains the locals, and the locals contribute to the global, or even constitute them.
쌍단, 꿀집 마사나, 쌤그치.
All right, I think we're done here.
That's the problem.
All right.
Actually, that
So then we still have
Humans are
to
starting to
we still have to do the is AI making you dumb, and we have to watch videos from unsolicited advice, because like this, look at this. This is crazy. This is exactly what we're looking for. I think there's going to be a lot of good videos here that I think yeah, we want to watch. This one is Science Objective. Like these are great titles. So we're coming back for that. We got to get this shirt. This is a big deal. We got to get this shirt somehow. What was it, $40? I don't know. Actually, wait a second. Oh, okay. I thought it was going to be more. All right. I'll keep that up as well. All right. I think I'm going to call it here. Thanks, everyone, for chilling. Hopefully this has been productive. So it was productive because we got those references, and we got I learned some stuff about economics. It's all good stuff. So yeah, thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day. I shall see you all later. And it was productive because we got that banger opening from Daniel Ent.